With a bit of luck, you'll enjoy today's conversation with a different but equally very important airline in this region. Now, the airline I'm talking about is Air Arabia, who late last year, amazingly, 15 years old already, celebrated its 15th birthday. It really was the trailblazer for the low-cost model in the region. It's grown from small beginnings to be a major player with over 50 aircraft in its fleet and flying over 8 million passengers a year. And it's always a personal pleasure for me to meet the CEO, who I'm going to invite up in a minute, Adel Ali, because I have to be careful when I interview people about saying whether they're young or old, but I don't need to be quite as careful with Adel because I don't know exactly what his age is, but we're similar because I was just checking with him now, we knew each other back in the 1990s. Some of you might not even have been born then, I don't know. When I was a junior network planner in British Airways in London, and Adel was looking after the Middle Eastern market territory for British Airways and would then come into London to lobby his case for airline capacity in British Airways. So no more little personal stories like that. I'd like to welcome to the stage Adel Ali, Group Chief Executive of Air Arabia. Yeah, if you get the steps, you won't trip over, Adel. There's a risk.
Hi, John.
Welcome, Adel.
Thank you.
Welcome to Dubai. I know you've just come from down the road from Sharjah, I guess.
Yeah, it was a long flight.
Yeah. Well, at least a short flight, at least. So higher utilization, I guess, you can get from that. Adel, I mentioned that.
Who's older?
I don't know. Well, let's discuss that afterwards. I've got an interesting birthday coming up this year, put it that way. So I won't say anything more about that. Yeah, I mean, that's very different days, Adel. I mean, I guess probably neither of us would have known about low cost back in the 1990s. I mean, Southwest had been born. It certainly wasn't present in Europe. It certainly wasn't present in the Middle East. But I was just asking you now before we began, you had that span of career at British Airways. You knew about the dynamics of getting network capacity in, what some people call a legacy airline. But now you're leading this low-cost airline today. How did you make that transition? Because it's not very often that you'll see people who come from that traditional world into the world which is quite different of low cost. How did you personally make that transition?
Thank you, John. Let me tell a story as well. My older brother told me, he says, your life has been always about downgrades. For some of you who don't know, I joined British Airways to work on the fleet of Concords, which was the best thing available in the industry. Then I moved from there because Concorde then was taken to operate on North Atlantic, I then was handling first and business class people and giving John a hard time in London. And then so that was a downgrade from Concorde to the premium cabin. Then I moved from there to Gulf Air. Then I moved from Gulf Air to low cost. So my life has been always downgrading in the industry. Yet I think I must admit, this is the one that I enjoy the most. The career has been very interesting. One that, if you work for a big organization like British Airways, you think actually you mastered the industry. So I thought I knew everything about airline industry until the time that I then decided to put an airline together. I realized I knew very little. And then I had to sort of walk through the path of how you put an airline together. And we were successful to put it together in about 6 months, which normally takes a good 2 years to put an airline together. So we had a good group of people working alongside me, and we managed to put this quickly. And something that I think probably one of the best thing I've done in my life is thinking and putting an LCC together in this region. Of course, when you put an airline like that together, you copy. And we did copy the LCCs of Europe, of America, of Australia, because they're all there at the time. Copying is always easy, but you need to know how to paste. So we managed to paste it correctly, and that's why it worked for us.
Well, I love that way you put that, copying, because there are so many copies and people use a name low cost, but maybe it's a low price, but it's not a low cost. But back at that time, 15 years ago, and you said you had that group, what kind of reference points did you look at? Because I remember reading or hearing that when Ryanair, which of course Ryanair didn't begin as a low-cost airline, but it became a low-cost airline under Michael O'Leary. I remember reading he went to the USA and met with the sadly recently passed away Herb Keller, the founder of Southwest, very different airline, which has been around over 40 years. Did you look across the Atlantic in terms of what was happening there as in this model of low cost?
Very much so. I think one has to be realistic in life. We looked at everything surrounding the low-cost industry. And we then had to look at the full demography and what happens in the reality life of where we live, the MENA region. I recognized at the time that the success of Ryanair or Southwest, that they were operating in a continent, not in countries. O'Leary had 530 million people living in Europe. He could have operated the whole Europe under two AOCs, one for one country in Switzerland and another one for everywhere, the whole Europe. Southwest, another 300 million people, and all what they needed is airplane and airports and operate. Whereas we, at time, 15 years back, with no exception, most of the Middle East, Indian subcontinent, Africa's airports were very restrictive in offering services. In almost every airline that existed was owned by the government of those countries, which it's natural when you own something, you want to protect it. So life was difficult, and we said, well, if we get 5 aircraft, which was in our original business plan for 5 years, it should be good enough. The encouragement came that when we looked which is the best airport to put a low cost in, most of key airports in the region had a national airline base. We looked then, Sharjah had a fantastic infrastructure from runway and aerodrome and everything else. And the catchment area there was good in the sense that you had a 15, 20 minutes drive to Dubai if the traffic helps you. And then you had the Northern Emirates, all of the customer had to sort of drive via Sharjah Airport to reach Dubai Airport. So the catchment was good. The other motive was the fact that we're living in a country that had a very high percentage of expatriate population. Now, if you are in a foreign country, you want two things. You want either to travel back home or get somebody from home to come and visit you. And there isn't enough time to do that if you can afford it. So we managed to bring affordability into the business. And as soon as we did this, we saw from year one, which is not known for airline industry in year one, to break even and make profit. And we achieved that. And we achieved that because people wanted to travel. There was a big need and thirst for an affordable, simple traveling between the MENA region.
I mean, it's pretty remarkable when you describe it in that way, Adel. I was just thinking, the Ryanair model in Europe, and I think in many ways Southwest in the US, was getting into these smaller secondary airports. And when you talk about there are more low-cost carriers in the region now here, but many will say, well, we don't have the same choice of secondary airports. But Sharjah, I remember, it was a point where, for example, I think it was Air China stopped on the way to Beijing in the past, in my days at British Caledonian, but you didn't really know what it was or where it was, but you've made it your own, as you described there. What about, I mean, not only the fact you had that customer base, as you said, a lot of expats who wanted to travel home, but thinking about the whole region in terms of regulation or traditional airlines, did you have a lot of barriers to go through there where people were suspicious, reluctant, thinking, whoa, we don't want to let this airline really get going because it could hurt other airlines that we already have?
Yeah, I think the industry has changed, and probably we started the change back in 2003, 28th October 2003 specifically, because there was no confidence in something called low-cost airline. People didn't understand fully. Airport, as I said, very restrictive. So the question was, to me, airports are no different than bus stops. You can't have a bus stop and tell the buses don't come in, because it's a building with a very long road for aircraft to land on. And the more you allow airplanes to land, the better for the economy of the country, and more people make money. A good story, since we have a little time, is really when we started the Sharjah airport back in 2003. The airport had few, as you suggested, few charter operators operating and few carriers. So the total occupancy of the airport were around 15%. And at the time, they were moving about 200 to 300,000 passengers a year. Few staff, and it was dark. And when the business is dull, you don't invest in it so much. So when we started, we had to sort of upgrade all that. But very interestingly, as we grew, the whole life has changed within Sharjah Airport and the surrounding. The whole Sharjah Airport surrounding used to recruit less than 500 people. Today there are 10,000 people working in that area. We had 4 broken taxis that they used to take passengers from the terminal, and halfway through they used to negotiate on the price, and if you don't pay them what they want, they used to get you out. Today there are a fleet of 300 branded taxis in that airport with the bus service to all over the UAE. We've got a hotel, we've got a huge catering infrastructure, offices have been put in place, and the safe zone, more people go to the university campus next to us. So the whole area has developed, and we do contribute just under 7% to Sharjah GDP. So it's not just an airline. And I think most of government, to just come back to the question you asked me, most of the governments and authorities around the region realizes now that aviation is a good economy. And the more of that you have, the more it helps. I was this morning at a conference at the Ritz-Carlton talking about the unemployment among the youth in the Arab world. Every year I go to this conference, the percentage increases. And aviation creates a service industry, and combine the aviation and service industry is one of the biggest employment. So from an economical angle, it's good. And a lot of, what is pleasing in 15 years later, to find that a lot of countries have changed their philosophies about other airlines coming in. And those who have succeeded. They have been able to invest in new airports, recruit more people, and the whole economical demography has changed. I mean, the city we're sitting in here is a very good example of that. Some of you maybe as old as John and I, or maybe you, not me. They see what was Dubai pre-85, before Emirates was established, and what is it today? in terms of the taxis, the airport, the people work there, and the whole infrastructure has changed. And no matter how much Dubai Airport puts more buildings and they expand it bigger, still gets busier. So I think you sort of, it's clearly that, and Dubai is not the exception. I think we've seen that in Beirut, we've seen that at Kuwait Airport, we've seen that at a lot of airports in Saudi now. They do encourage airline to come. Yet, one would like to see the whole region opens up and let the flow of airplanes be free. And that will only help the traveling public in terms of convenient, and it also drive the pricing down. So we are all in for open sky policy amongst the Arab world, anywhere in the world we can do. But when we started, yeah, we had to struggle for years. We had to, our business model had no India in it, had no Pakistan in it, had no Saudi Arabia in it. Today we fly to 13 airports in India, 13 cities, 12 or 13 in Saudi, Pakistan, more than 8 airports. So people are changing. There is a recognition almost in every civil aviation authority that the best way to grow the industry, to benefit the country that they are in, is to allow more airplanes to land.
I want to come back, good that you touched on those two countries. I'll come back in a few minutes about Saudi and India in particular. Just one other thing about those early days that you mentioned, expats was a big source of traffic, but local people here in the Gulf, from maybe UAE in particular, I think, I may have got it wrong, but more recently at Fly Dubai, you know, your colleague or partner in crime, so to speak, is the other leading low-cost carrier. I think it was somebody in Fly Dubai who told me when they began thinking about local people's thinking, they, on a flight where a local customer had to buy a bottle of water, and they were so angry about it, they bought the bottle of water, opened it, and threw it at the stewardess because they were so used to being given this. And I'm not sure that they were a civil servant or something who was used to traveling business class here, there, and everywhere. But was, and that's just a little, you know, anecdote, but I mean, was for that challenge, as you said, low cost wasn't known. Even in Europe, I can think people thought, oh, we don't want this low cost, it's all cheap and nasty, and, you know, and also nasty people using it. Did you have that kind of mentality to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, there was, like, people were used to flying in a way. Air travel was for the rich societies. So you had to, and if we go back to much before my days and John's days, people used to travel in 3-piece suit with a bow tie. And now they travel in their pajamas. Yeah? So that has been a huge shift there. And the transition, we had to go through so many experiences. But yeah, we've had, when we said we'll have a low cost, a lot of people thought we will have no seats on airplane and people will stand on the flight as a bus.
Or pay for the toilets.
Or that was O'Leary's thing.
O'Leary's idea.
Yeah. Then a lot of people assume that we have no insurance, and you name it. Strangely enough, people were, objecting to not having something free given to them, but they still wanted the cheap fare. Very interesting. You travel on a train for 20 hours, and they give you nothing.
Nothing.
And the train fare is actually, in a lot of countries, particularly in Europe, is more expensive than airfare. And if you're lucky, then you got to walk down to the end of the corridor, pay about €5 to get a rotten cup of coffee. And nobody complains.
I think it's amazing. I mean, I'm sure you've seen, I know you visit Europe quite often, you know, British Airways, our mutual former employer, who has had to fight in short haul, by the same means as their low-cost competitors, be it with buy on board, you can buy a sandwich, you buy a drink. The newspapers are full of, this is disgusting and shocking, BA's downgraded, they're not giving a free drink and a free sandwich. But you say, hang on, have you been on a train? Have you been on a bus? You probably pay more to get a bus to one of the London airports than you do on the flight, but you're expecting a free sandwich.
But I think this is where this industry has been bad. The aviation industry need to be a business industry and not a civil service. And because of that, we get people used to that. If you travel for 1 hour, you need to be given a full meal or you're a bad airline. Nothing to do with the fact that I took you from a point to another point in a good airplane safely. But you're a bad airline because you didn't give me a curry and rice. And in this region, it even goes beyond that. Because people travel for an hour, they want a 25 or 30-inch screen in front of them with the latest movie. Because of that, we've just introduced our Sky Time. But they want all that. I just, literally 2 days ago, me and Hussam flew 2.5 hours in Europe on one of the distinguished airlines. We're supposed to be in business class. There's no in-flight entertainment. The seats were exactly that what you get in economy. It was fine. We got there, no problem. So we do spoil people in this region. And I think sometimes you can't afford it because everybody wants the same price. But they want, so we created an expectation that maybe it's not reality for the region. Hence, I think we're seeing there is quite a lot of move for applying the fourth class and trying to say, look, we'll have the super economy and the non-super economy and all that sort of thing. That's because the economical pressure that is coming into the industry. But I think we were lucky 15 years back because the media played a big role in seeing that this is something coming to the industry. It will change the industry, and it has changed the industry a lot. And therefore, it's very important to educate the general public what it's all this about. And I'm really grateful because the media played a big role in no matter how much we would have advertised, it wouldn't have done that role because advertising, not necessarily everybody believes in it. But when you get journalists sit down and write exactly what this means, over time people will understand better. So they did a big educational role in telling people what it is. And people bought in it very quickly. I think the most interesting way I remember was the first week or first month of our operation. The bus company that used to operate between UAE and Levant took us to courts because we were damaging their business. But we recognize that those people who get in a bus in summer for 30 or 40 hours or 2 days and number of borders to get between two countries, if for the same price they had the opportunity to jump on an airplane and get there within 3 hours, they will come back to us every time they want to travel. And that's what we've achieved. So reflecting back, I think that was a success. Reflecting back, air travel, even the premium luxury 5-star, or some calls themselves 7 stars, used to advertise cabin crew, good food, all that sort of thing. But nowadays, no matter which class airlines advertise, they put a price tag at the end of it because price does matter. And that was the change, the philosophy that public realized that, ooh, people can travel inexpensive. Why should they pay so much money? But the local market, the locals in the GCC, you know, again, their life has changed as a result of people like us coming. I call ourselves low cost because not a lot of low cost exists in the region. But we've managed to still keep it low cost. Hopefully we won't change. But we found a lot of student locals that used to move between the region. They used to travel once every quarter if they were lucky. We see a lot of women travel alone now for weddings and all that sort of thing. We see a lot of local businesses, small and enterprises, they tend to fly in the morning and come back in the evening. So a lot of local travel has created itself as well. And I think it helped the whole community, whether you're local or not. It helps you, it connected you with your family. I can give you dozens of stories, and good stories of how people's life has been changed as a result of we starting something. And the fact that we started, some copied, the conventional carriers woke up and realized that they need to be competitive in the market and reduce their prices. That meant the whole community as a whole traveled more, and we stimulated this.
Well, I was going to ask you if you had a typical customer, but in fact you've answered the question anyway, because of the very diversity. It's a lot of it. It's expats, it's family, it's students, it's all sorts of people, and it's across different countries and cultures. And the other point, coming on to the nuts and bolts, so to speak, financially, you've had a track record of profitability over these 15 years. So given that one of the mechanisms, again, that an airline like, say, Ryanair can use, picking hundreds of small secondary airports, is not available, how have you managed to keep that discipline of cost low and profitability consistent?
Thanks. Look, two things here. One is the customer segmentation. You were going to ask me, who was a typical Air Arabia's customer? In my old company I used to work for, we used to engage a big consultant firms, and they used to do quite a lot of work, and then they used to take the entire management team in a room one day and tell us who flies with this company. And they used to start saying, well, it's the wealthy people, it's the business people, it's the labor, it's the visit friends and relatives. And they used to have about 20 different types
Massive
of categories.
segmentation.
At the end of the days, it was sort of the dogs and cat and everybody. So basically, no airline will say no to anybody who wants to pay money and get on your aeroplane, regardless who you are, right? Hence, you get on an airplane, you find next to you somebody in flip-flop, another person in pajamas, and one in suit. So that's how people travel nowadays. And we looked at this, and we also find exactly the same profile. We get very, very influential, rich, high wealth income people with their entire family. They travel with us. And we get the middle class, and we get the less fortunate people in their life. They all travel. And this is true, that the number of big families in this region and another region that fly with us, and sometimes I get surprised, and I ask them, why these guys are flying with us? They can afford it, so money is not the issue. It's not because it's low fare. They fly with us, and they tell me, said, well, because we are a husband and a wife, 6 children. We normally take another family with us. We got the housemates to come with us. So in the total, we are 12, 13 people. If we travel on a conventional airline, the husband and wife has to be in first class. The children has to be in business. Some other has to be in economy. And what we do with Air Arabia is we buy 3 or 4 rows. We sit together. We enjoy the mix of type of foods that you guys have got that we have to buy. And we just have a picnic on an aeroplane on a 3 or 4 hours journey, and life is good. And as you know, I think once I remember Muhammad Abbar on the stage said, if you are rich, to be rich, you have to be mean and don't spend, and mice, and don't spend money.
That's how you get rich.
Exactly.
Stay rich.
So, and those people, they get all this benefit. They say, well, it's also cheap. And so that's our market segmentation, really, everybody.
Yeah.
But a lot of, nowadays we find, because of the convenience, the small airports, Sharjah being small, easy to get in and out, a lot of consultants tend to use us because they paid from door to door.
Right.
And that cost them or cost their clients cheaper. So a lot of those people fly with us. And your second question, how do we keep it profitable?
Big important question.
Yeah. Well, you know, KFC will never tell you what spices they use to give you the chicken, because otherwise you lose it. But I think it is a tough industry. It's a very expensive industry, and if you lose it, it's very difficult to gain it back. So you always got to look at, and perhaps credit to the previous company that both of us were working at. One of the things we were taught that in the aviation industry, you should be able to take 5% cost out every year, because you are never going to be in control of what you charge the customer. The market force dictates how much you can charge. And the public generally have loyalty to airlines as long as their prices is good. The moment the price is not good, their loyalty goes away very fast. And therefore, you got to be always very competitive, and you got to drive the cost down. Fundamentals of, you know, a lot of conversation we have, and in this particular region, because, you know, you meet with a high worth individuals and normal people and so on. A lot of people say, well, why can't you give something and charge them 10 dirhams more or dollar more? And you realize that you can give, but it's all about multiples of numbers. It's not about the bottle of water or a peanut or whatever. But it's the industry that once you add those numbers up, it becomes millions. I think there's an old story that goes, I don't know whether it was Pan Am or TWA, that they decided to take an olive off a salad, and they saved $1 million a year from one olive on each salad. And that's how this industry works. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's focus on the business as a business. I think we run a financial company. We've got shareholders that 30,000 people have shares in the company. They have trusted us with their money. And we good just to make sure that, and they have an expectation that we give them back every year something. Otherwise, they'll put the money in a bank and get it back.
But you know, sorry, I just want to jump in on it. 2 points you made there. I mean, I've got to admit, when I was this network planner that you met all those years ago, when I was young, you know, in BA, we would look in our scenarios about network planning, about what was the load factor, how many seats could we fill, what price could we get, and we'd ask our colleagues in finance to tell us what was the cost of flying a certain kind of plane. And if in our wildest dreams, with a certain load and certain revenue, it didn't look profitable, we'd write a memo saying, don't fly this route or don't put this frequency. We never imagined we could actually change the costs. Is there a way we could go and negotiate with somebody, an aircraft manufacturer, an airport? So that, I also, not to the same level as you, but I went down a low-cost avenue, and then suddenly my eyes were open. You can change costs. So that's, I think, a revelation that you described there about cost. And the other about the revenue, I was actually, without giving away any details, I was with a client, not even 2 weeks ago, in Europe, talking with Ryanair, and a client said to Ryanair, do you know, you could put your tickets up about 10 euros in price. And Ryanair said, I'm not going to go to the board to say I can fly that route and put the ticket price up and pay that airport's higher costs. That's not how we operate. And it's this idea, as you said, that you have to offer the price the market will support. Two big differences.
You're right. I mean, one has to simplify things, but There isn't a two-day the same. You know, I think if we were in Europe, I mean, Ryan, Europe, every 200 miles you have an airport, and the train infrastructure is good. Roads are good, and you don't have borders. And therefore, whichever airport you land in it makes it easy. The agony in the MENA region, you got other challenges. It's the only region in the world, by the way, that the main country airport is cheaper than the secondary airports. Yeah. So if I fly to the main city, which is very busy, that all the airlines flying into, I pay a lower fees than serving a city that has nobody flying, empty airport, nobody's in there. And all those things are done. And you find the fuel is also more expensive at that airport. Now in Europe, secondary airport want to build those cities, so they recruit people, they give you an incentive to fly, they give you a lower fuel price, which is great for LCC business model.
Does that mean those secondary airports haven't opened their eyes, as it were, to that opportunity here, or is it because they're not allowed to, or something different?
I think the reason being is in Europe, most of the airports are private businesses.
Right.
Here, almost 99.9% of the airports are owned by the country, and about 90% of them, the responsible person for the national airline, the airport, the ground handling, and everything is the same government person.
Right.
And that's why the competition, it is not good for those countries who have multiple airports, but they seem to apply, and all what it does not develop the industry fast enough, or it develops it and you'll have a massive congestion in one airport, and the other airports are empty. And where you want to recruit people are all those small cities, because in the big cities, the job opportunities are bigger. I think it was 2008 or 9 when we started flying to India. At the time, India had 4 or 5 international airports. And we went in there and we had a lot of discussion with the authorities, civil aviation, and we said, look, your 5 or 4 airports are so congested, and people have to come in, clear immigration, then go and buy a ticket on a domestic or take a 50 hours train or something. All the cities have good airports. So if we convert some of them, and they experimented and they gave us, as a result, we as Air Arabia, and I think quite a lot of other airlines now operate a hell of a lot of airports within India and other places. And those 5 airports, business has not shrunk, it's grew. So the more you generate and the more people get into the air, the business grows. I've not seen in my career time a country that says the air travel has reduced as a result. It only grows.
Let me just step back 1 minute. I want to come back exactly to that point, but before I forget, on results, I said about this consistent run of profitability. Last year, you just declared a loss for 2018. Just tell us in a couple of words briefly. I mean, all airlines have struggled with fuel prices. You've got one other issue. Give us in a couple of words.
No, I think, look, we've had, in the 15 years we've been there, we had 15 good profitable years, including 2018. 2018, somebody last night asked me, tell me what happened with Abraj Capital Investment. And my answer was, do you remember 2008 Lehman Brothers issues? He said, yeah. I said, it's version 2 of Lehman Brothers. So basically, we lost an investment that we made in a private equity. The legal side is taking care of it, and it will happen, and a lot of companies have invested in that company. It was MENA's biggest private equity fund that existed. But we decided as a company to take everything, impair the whole amount into 1 year. And the reason we did that was that, look, let's take a 1 year loss and move on in the life, because our business is not about managing the legal side. That is something I will look after with the lawyers and the experts in the industry. But we need to grow our business, the potential and the opportunities are there. So I decided to convince our board and our shareholders at the AGM that, look, let's take a full amount impairment and let's concentrate on our business. The Abraj investment had absolutely no impact on the company's strategy, growth, financial issues. So we're moving on, and hopefully we will have a good year 2019 and life would be back to normal. So that was in a nutshell 2018 what happened. Hopefully a history behind us from a day-to-day business management.
Right. Thanks for that, Adel. Back on markets, I mean, you touched on India. I just want to ask you about some of this issue about markets opening up. India is one where you're a big player. I'll try to wrap up two things together. Challenges in the Indian market about, as you said, congestion capacity. We've just seen what is probably the end of Jet Airways. It could come back, but it seems unlikely. And India has its own low-cost carriers, but it's growing. And to wrap that up with the Saudi market, which I think is very interesting. Saudi is a market that's been arguably quite closed for a long time, but is opening up. You're playing in the Saudi market. It also, I learned, has a lot of smaller airports. It has a much bigger population as well compared to many countries in the region. Tell us a bit about those two markets, how you see them going forward.
I think let me start with Saudi, because geographically it's closer. Saudi has, over years, has changed a lot in a positive way. We used to fly to 3 airports. Now we fly to 14 airports in Saudi. I think the civil aviation and the government understood that the more you bring in airlines, the more people will visit. There is a natural market there. And the Saudi is, as you said, from a population point of view, is large. Therefore, it's a big market for any airline. I think also what they've done is they have established proper systems for the secondary airports, although they're still more expensive than the main airports.
Right.
That bit still, it's outstanding. But the fuel is more expensive in outskirts than actually in the main airports. But I think what they've also done, they've also developed their own Saudi carriers. There are 6 airlines in Saudis now based, Saudi carriers. So they've also developed their own airlines, because this business is a two-way. You know, it's not a one-way system. So you go into somebody's country, they come into your country. So both sides benefit. So those Saudi carriers now come to UAE, and UAE carriers go in there. And I think there was a slowdown about 2 years ago. There was a minor drop, but we see the economy seem to be bouncing back on Saudi market. Certainly our flights are back to normal, and the seat factor. We're quite optimistic about Saudi and the way they are approaching the whole commercial side of life. I think India, we have not grown in India since 2010, simply because no more seat has been given to Air Arabia. Again, there is a big Indian population here. There's a big local non-Indian who fly into India for various reasons, including medical, tourists, and so on. India is a huge population, big market, so there's always going to be congestions on the route. I think for us, again, it's reciprocal. So at the moment, the Indian carriers use the same number of seats coming into UAE as UAE uses to go into India. And the market has carried probably 49, 51, 51, 49, depending on the month. We carry year around about over 90% seat factor. as you know from your previous profession, that once you exceed an 80% seat factor, it calls for increasing the capacity. And to have year-round over 90 and 95% seat factor means you're turning business away. We hope that the Federal Civil Aviation Authority, which I know they are continuing trying to have discussion with the Indian authority, we hope soon they'll be able, obviously they got election in India now, past that, hopefully if they be able to conclude to increase the capacity, and if they do, we will benefit from that.
Okay, I'm just sensing that we've got this terrible clock down here working against us. I've got a couple more big interesting things to ask you.
Sure. And we then give you 5 minutes.
Perfect. I mean, one thing just quickly, I mean, you went on from the early beginnings of the 5 aircraft in Sharjah, not only to grow here, but to open up, I don't know if you call them subsidiaries, franchises, Air Arabia in other countries. You have a base, an Air Arabia Morocco, Air Arabia Egypt. For a time you had Air Arabia Jordan, and you've opened up another UAE base. I remember being here with you. Was it about 4 years ago now?
Yes,
in Ras Al Khaimah? Just briefly on this one, so I can come on to another couple of topics. Tell us about, are they different? I guess they all have different characteristics in markets and behavior, even though your model as a business.
Yeah, no, I think simple. We call them JVs, joint ventures.
Okay.
We own 49%, and the local commercial business people in those countries own 51%. From a product point of view, from the management point of view, it's exactly the same. So it's seamless. It's no different than EasyJet or Ryanair in Europe. The only difference is because in there, the law of the land allows you to have one certificate for all the carriers you have. In this part of the world, each country has got its own certification. Hence, we have a different legal entities and certification. Otherwise, there's no difference. And just to sum that up, we are very pleased with, obviously here it's done well. We're very happy with Ras Al Khaimah 4 years ago. It's very steady and it's working well. Morocco has been a star. And we moved up to 10 airplanes into there and more to go. And we fly over 70 routes between 6 airports in Morocco to all over Europe. Wherever there is an airport, they tend to go. And it's doing financially very well. Egypt, because what happened 2011 onward, it was unstable. We slowed down things. We see everything is back now. Tourists coming back from this part of the world, from Europe. We kept Egypt at the time with just 1 airplane to keep the license, but now we've sent 2 more, and our intention is to grow, and we're doing flights from the Red Sea into Europe, Upper Egypt into the Gulf, and from Alexandria. So Egypt for us now is the time to grow that base. So those are good. Jordan, I said the story before, it hasn't worked for us, so we closed it down.
Interesting. Ryanair, so Michael O'Leary quoted yesterday, he's going into Jordan in quite a big way now. Do you think you might come back? Or maybe do you think his style of communicating might push things along a bit that could be helpful?
I wish him luck. I hope he gets a better treatment than us.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Adel, on those markets. Now let's turn on to, again, the biggest aircraft. I mean, you've been loyal to Airbus since the beginning. Had the A320 as a mainstay of your fleet, and if I'm not mistaken, if I remember, you've even had awards from Airbus themselves in terms of the highest utilization and I think technical dispatch reliability recognition from Air Arabia on the aircraft. You've just proudly taken, no, I'm fine, thanks. Just taken delivery of your first A321neo only, 2 weeks ago, I think. What does that mean, that initial step? That aircraft can allow you to fly much further. Does that tie in also with your announcement of Kuala Lumpur? Does that need the 321 to fly that far?
Yeah, thank you. I think 320 has been a good airplane. It's done fantastic for us. Every profitability and success of Air Arabia has been associated with A320. Good airplane. We always wanted to do a little more, and we always wanted a slightly bigger airplane because some of our routes we tend to have multiple frequencies, but you could do with bigger airplane, especially if you have a 90 and 95% seat factor. So the 321 gives us 50 more seats on an airplane, which is good. Also, it gives us a longer range. So we do at the moment places like Prague. We want to do a bit more in North Africa. We have some traffic rights into China. Kuala Lumpur, as you mentioned. For some unknown reason, a lot of guys, they tell me, when do you fly to Bangkok? And I say, we're not yet. So again, all those routes, opportunities that comes up, perhaps a few places in Europe that we think that could be a niche market that we could do, not necessarily where there are massive operations exist already from here, but how could we complement those? So the 321, again, it's a very new airplane. We need to test it. So we just got it 2 weeks ago. We put it into service 2 days ago. And I think we will be testing that aircraft. We should have had the third aircraft delivered, but there is a bit of slow in delivery.
Airbus has got some
challenges as well, yeah. So as soon as we get the 6 of them, and we know enough of them, we don't need to move on and put an order in that's overdue. Air Arabia needs to put an order in for probably 100 plus airplanes, some of it to replace our existing fleet, and some of it for organic growth of the hubs that we have. And we're going out to both Boeing and Airbus to see who is, it's a commercial deal, so whomever comes up with a better option, we will go for. And probably your question will be to me, well, are you going to have a mix of fleet? Mm-hmm. I think we've got a fleet that is sizable now, that if the commercial giving is good, the business can afford switching.
Right, to have both companies.
Yes.
And again, just to get it precise, because I put in my notes to remember to ask you, I put, who were you looking at? Boeing, Airbus, and I was going to ask you about the regional players too. I mean, one of them now would have been Bombardier as part of Airbus anyway.
They've been observed
Embraer's
by
kind
the
of going into Boeing. But those aircraft are a bit smaller size, but I mean...
We're looking at them. I think, we are not a mega-size airline to order every year.
Yeah.
So we're with a team of experts within our organization that looking at all our future growth, because we started operating domestic in Egypt as well as in Morocco. Mm-hmm. And those will only grow. So maybe a 320 or a 321 may not be the best aircraft, and some of those regional aircraft could be suitable. So we're going into this with a very open mind.
And the immediate, I mean, this has been, the analysis has been going on for a while, but the challenge which sadly has emerged in the last few weeks for Boeing with the MAX, and I think I've just seen quoted even while the ATM's been going on, even His Royal Highness here in Dubai has commented about the MAX. Would that colour your thinking as well? It's a complicated one because we don't quite know where this is going yet.
It is, but I guess if you have orders and waiting for delivery, your decision making is something. Yeah. For us, by time I think we make those decisions, one would hope that Boeing have sorted out, mm-hmm. because I don't think one aircraft. I mean, there is a monopoly of two companies. So if one doesn't produce, it'd be quite challenging for one of them to fulfill the market needs.
Yeah, it's not really, I mean, people keep saying, why is Airbus not, can they take advantage? At the end of the day, they've both got very full order books.
It ain't easy. It ain't easy.
Yeah. No, that's interesting to watch. And just back on the 321s ahead of it. Oh, so when are we likely to hear on that order? I think you said this quarter.
I
so
hope.
probably by
I think time goes very fast, but I think we have gone. The guys are meeting as we speak with both companies this week, and the meetings will go on. These negotiations will take time, so the sooner the better. But obviously, Boeing has got some challenges at the moment to handle, priority to what we're doing, because if I was Boeing, my focus would be somewhere else. But one would respect all those circumstances. And as soon as we're ready, I suspect it would be another 3 to 4 months before we actually put an order in.
Great. And you mentioned about the range potential on the 321. And have I got this wrong, Adel? I thought you had started a flight to China. Did you fly to one point?
No, we fly to west of China, to Urumqi.
And that still is being served,
we
but
still
that doesn't
fly,
need the range.
No, but you need to go more into central and other places.
Perfect. Industry challenges in general, I mean, fuel price. I mean, I suppose fuel price, I asked this question to Tim Clark yesterday, maybe a double-edged sword, because you need to burn the fuel, so you don't want to pay any more than you have to, but probably some of your customers are in the petroleum industry, so if things are harder for them as they were, particularly until the price started to go up, where does that sit on balance for you?
We normally hedge about 90% of our fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So this year we hedged at 90+% at $62, which is good for us. It is a double-edged sword in terms of you need the right fuel price in the region for the economy to keep good.
Yeah.
But obviously, putting it into the tank, the cheaper it is, the better.
The better. Absolutely. And again, geopolitical challenges, there are plenty around. I mean, sadly, this particular region has.
What's new?
Exactly. I suppose this is, again, about being low cost is also being flexible and dynamic. You described Egypt, you went down to one aircraft, now you're back up. It's not a market. I don't think you're into Sri Lanka, are you? The sad news.
We do.
You are in Sri Lanka.
Twice a day. No, we don't have a hub, but we go there twice a day.
I mean, the sad news there, but this shows the dynamics, how it changes quickly. That country's built up a great tourism following, and suddenly it's hit.
Those things are inevitable. I mean, the geopolitical bit has been something we've been living it for years in this part of the world. Being optimistic, I think it's probably better than what we were. Mm-hmm. Things are much calmer. Yeah. So it's on the right track. And I think the odd things like Sri Lanka will come up, unfortunately, and so on. But you know what? Public seem to forget things like this very quickly, and the market regains itself very, very fast. We've seen these experiences in Egypt. We've seen these experiences elsewhere, in India, in Mumbai, in a hotel a few years back.
That's right.
And I think the public are very intelligent nowadays, that they realize, okay, well, we're not going to put an X on something just because something happened. It will slow down for a few weeks, and then things will be under control.
And again, we talked about the long range potential of the 321 and Kuala Lumpur starting. I don't know, how many hours is that?
About 7.5.
So would you consider kind of becoming a long haul low cost as well as the shorter haul that you are today?
At the moment, I mean, we've got a good 32-inch seat pitch. We have got in-flight entertainment on all our aircraft using your own gadgets, just being launched yesterday, called SkyTime, using the digital technology that exists. Our in-flight food is excellent. I think, and probably I'm biased, but I think we've got the best economy product at the best price that exists in the industry. I'm not after business class cabin yet.
Yeah, that's a contrast, isn't it, with Fly Dubai? I guess they have a different mission in life, and especially
I'm sure they do, and they have probably
with Emirates
working closely with Emirates and so on. But for us, I think it's not broken, so don't fix it.
But the in-flight entertainment that you've just announced, I mean, that's going to be complimentary. You're not going to try to extract a few extra dirhams.
It
on
does.
that?
It does. But again, it would have been very expensive if we would have used what, and this is why we didn't do it in the past. But now technology allows you to put a small box on the top or on the side of an aeroplane, and it gives it streams all sorts of few hundred channels in, and people can enjoy it. And the weight is the worst thing on aeroplanes.
Yeah,
and so I don't have
You
to
don't
put
want heavy
screens
boxes
and
under the
boxes.
seats,
So you can, we've put the new seats, which has got the trays, which has any gadget holder for you just to enjoy it, and charging your gadget. It does cost a little, but it's small in comparison.
Adel, we're down to the last couple of minutes officially. I just want to see if anybody does have a burning question, a brief question they'd like to ask directly to Adel while you're here. See if you can. It's the one back here. If we could just get the microphone to this gentleman about halfway down. We are ASAP. He's got your hand up. If you wouldn't mind, just quickly introduce yourself and try to keep your question as brief as you can so that Adel can give you a quick answer.
Hi, I'm Brendan Sobey. I'm an analyst with Kappa Center for Aviation. You were just talking about KL. I wanted to ask you an inevitable question about partnerships, working with other LCCs. It's obviously KL is AirAsia's hub. AirAsia experimented a little bit over here, didn't work. Is there any possibility of kind of relooking at partnerships and using the hub to serve other markets beyond KL now that you're going to be there soon?
We haven't examined that yet. I know AirAsia is significant and large in KL, but as we start the operation after summer, we'll see how things go. If there was an opportunity that both party benefits, we may look at it, but at the moment there's nothing that happening there.
Thanks very much, Adel. Well, we are, we've got a few seconds left. There's a gentleman at the back. If you could possibly ask a brief question, I might try to squeeze you, the other gentleman, ahead quickly if we can.
My name is Imtiaz Muqbil from Travel Impact in Newswire in Bangkok. Why aren't you flying to Bangkok?
We will be.
When
Once we get enough airplanes, we're waiting now. We're starting the first medium range in July, after Ramadan, and the first one is KL. And as more airplane comes, other routes will be doing that.
One just quick follow-up.
No, I've got it. Just to be fair, do me a favour, pass the microphone forward to the gentleman in front there. Right. If you could just introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ale, for sharing your insights. My name is Manuel Ley. I'm with Hotel Connections. We manage hotel accommodations for airlines worldwide. You mentioned earlier that prices are determined by the market, right? So you're constantly looking at ways of saving 5% every year or so. Have you identified those areas where your focus would be without sharing the recipe for the secret sauce, right?
The major costs in airlines are airplanes, fuel, and your people. Aircrafts comes with aircrafts, with the maintenance, with all that sort of thing. So the more you utilize it, it's no different than a taxi. The more that you're on the road, the driving, you're carrying customers, the better your bottom line is. So that's one element. Efficiency in the staff, you need to have good staff, well paid, so they work hard, and that brings in efficiency, not the numbers. And I think that the third bit is about the overall efficiency of business, what you don't need in the aircraft. For example, fuel is a good one. There are lots of technology fuel management system nowadays that tend to save you fuel on flying, on altitude, and so on. And the more of those things you invest in and bring to the business, the better it is for your saving.
Adel, unfortunately, we are out of time. We're running a minute into overbooked. It's always a pleasure to meet you and speak with you and to share our common history without disclosing publicly our actual ages, especially to hear the early beginnings of Air Arabia. So Adel Ali, Group Chief Executive of Air Arabia, thank you very much.